Let me check. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you very much and good morning, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for the invitation. Let me share the slide and host disable participating screen sharing. I'm not able to share the slide.
Oh, you should be
However-
able to. Let me double check that. Now you should be able to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Just a few words about me and about this project. I've been living and working in Tanzania for the last 12 years. I work at the University of Dodoma. I built here the research team, and we work on the CG modeling and macroeconomic modeling. But for the last couple of months, I've been invited by the Tanzanian government president office, and I work at the planning commission. We work on the macroeconomic modeling for the Tanzanian economy, so that all of my life here in Tanzania related to the modeling. So that I would like to introduce the research results, and this is a 2 years program, 2 years project, which has been supported by the Hewlett Foundation and the PEP. We work together with the 7 research team members. 2 of them are government officials from the Ministry of Gender and Ministry of Finance. I know that I have a time limitation and I try to be very briefly. And so that currently in Tanzania, as well as in all African countries, the gender issue, this is a highly important, and especially the women economic empowerment. And if we are going through the international reports, like Human Development Report of the UN, we will find that the Tanzania already closed some gap in some social indicators related to the gender. However, still now in Tanzania still has some problem, and this problem, the main problem, related to the labor market. Still now the gender inequality in the labor market persist, and especially it is related to the informal sector, where the huge number employed or engaged workers are women. And also we know that in the informal workers dominate here in Tanzania and in African countries is in the service sectors, and especially in the trade sector, and in the agricultural sector, and other as well as other sectors. And also the women generally, we participated in unpaid household care work, and we don't have some other opportunities. Tanzanian government knows about this one, and has been done many changes, and many programs has been allocated and implemented to reduce the gender inequality and to introduce the women economic empowerment in the society, so that the government already introduced the registration of through the identity cards, the informal workers, the local government provides some trainings for the women, but unfortunately it is not enough. It is not enough, and still there is a gap, as I said that. And the macro policy, which is aimed at the gender responsive budgeting, can promote and the labor inequalities, informality, and to increase the economic growth. And so that this is our evidence and the case study why we decide, context of the study, why we decided to focus on the informal sector. And through this research, we address the 2 research objectives. The first one, we focus on the investment in the road infrastructure development and how it is impact on the women in the informal sector. And the second one, we decided to find the best option of the wage subsidy program in the informal labor market to improve the labor market outcomes in the whole labor market. And so that we use the CG model, PEP 1T model. We have done a lot of modifications so that we briefly what we have done, so that the modeling the public investment in the road infrastructure, we introduced the externalities, we disaggregated the value added between formal and informal sector. We introduce different types of the households with kids, with several number of kids, with under 5 kids, the kids with the women with the kids under 5 years, with one kid, 3 kids, and the women without kids, so that also we introduce the time allocation between the market work and domestic work. We estimated how this impact on the what is the interlinkages with a time allocation between formal and informal sector, and also finally we modified the labor income in the of the household who employed in the formal and in the informal sector. So that the main database, this is a social accounting matrix 2015, and based on the research purposes, the social accounting matrix has been aggregated, disaggregated, introduced the gender aspect in the labor market, in the value added, in the capital and in the labor. We split not only for the between gender, also between formal and informal sector, the households. We aggregated the matrix until 17 industries, activities, in order to see the impact of our simulations. And we simulated the 2 policy scenarios. As I said, that the first one, we decided to follow the government strategy and what government is doing right now, because the Tanzanian since 2015 has been investing a lot in the road infrastructure development, and so that we decided to simulate a 7% increase in public investment in road infrastructure, and then to see how this what is the impact on the labor market, and especially on the women, how the women can benefit from this simulation. And the second and of course that we analyze the transmission channel and our key messages, so that we understand that and we assume that the boosting economic growth, investing in the road infrastructure development, increases the women participation in the formal labor market, reduces the time which we spend on the domestic work, and increases the contribution to the total household income. This is our general idea. And the second simulation, it is not implemented, and it is under the discussion with the government, but we found that this is a very good policy option, how to support the women, so that we decided to design the policy related to the wage subsidy for the women which are employed in the informal sector, in the specific industries, so that where the number of the informal women informal women are higher. This is a manufacturing, this is a trade, this is a tourism sector, accommodation, and the food services and other services. So that this policy scenario, of course, that because it is related to the government budget reduction, we decided to introduce the financial mechanism of the subsidies. The first one, we introduced the reduction of the public administration, and in the second sub-simulation, so that we adjusted the indirect tax to keep the deficit constant. And all of this financial mechanism are related to the government vision. So that the main results, of course, that they are positive, and we already presented the research results to the parliament. We already presented the research findings to our main stakeholders through the policy engagement, through other things, and we are waiting for the feedback. So that the main results, it shows that if the government continue to invest in the road infrastructure development, it can help to women as well, and to the men, to reduce the domestic time allocation and to increase the market work time allocation. According to the results, as we can see that the market work allocation, so that when the workers can spend in the labor market, increasing because it is reducing the time which we spend to the transport and for the other activities. And this is it works. And for the last 12 years, I saw that a lot of improvement in this one activities, and so that it helps. The second one, so that we found that the investment in the road infrastructure, of course, that increases the labor supply, and especially for the workers in the formal sector. And our results shows that the women benefit more from this one, and so that for them it is easily to find a job in the formal sector. And we can see that the labor supply for the formal women in the formal sector increases more, even in the long and in the short run. Of course, that the investment, this is a part of the aggregate demand, and we found that there is a positive results on the macroeconomic indicators, and on the and there is a positive impact on the household consumption, real household consumption. And the second simulation, which is also interesting because it shows that as we have the two labor markets, formal and informal, and we have two gender, and we found, and the results, it shows that the introducing the wage subsidy for the informal sector, the for the labor supply in the formal sector increases, and especially for the women, so that it works very well. And of course, that when the labor supply in the formal sector increases, there is a direct effect on their output, especially in the industries where the wage subsidy is introduced. And of course, that there is a very good impact on the on the household income and on the household consumption, so that many women we can employ formally, we can get salary, real salary, and so that we can help, we can use this money for the family, and especially for the kids. And we know that generally the women, they are more responsible than men for the kids. And so that the results are positive. Of course, that we have some non-positive results, and but generally, if we talk about the macro policy solution, which is promoting, which is promoted the women economic empowerment in African countries and in the globe, so that it works really. And our results, it shows that the public investment in road infrastructure increases the women participation in the labor market, reduces the women's time deficit, so that it increases the women time allocation in the labor market, and reduces the domestic time allocation. And also it can facilitate of the informal labor, especially women, to the formal sector through the informal sector. And the wage subsidy also, it shows the positive result as well, so that the wage subsidy provided by the government can help to reduce the informality in the labor market. Many workers employed in the formal sector, we pay taxes, they contribute to the production activities, and so that there is a high impact, the direct impact on the GDP. And the main policy recommendation, so that we, of course, that we recommended to the government that it's need to find the option in the how to introduce the wage subsidies. And secondly, we recommend that the government should continue to invest in the road infrastructure development. Tanzania, this is one of the biggest country in African continent, and of course that there is a lot of challenges, and it's need to provide support, investment support, not only in the labor market, but also it's need to take into account the urban and rural areas. And so that in complex, it works well. And we found that our results in line in the reality. Yeah, I think that I'm done. Thank you.
You have 2 minutes left if you want to say anything else.
So, I'm sorry, yes, I see that. Yeah, but if you have any questions, and I will be happy to answer. And
Okay, we'll have Emel Memis, who is going to be giving some comments.
Sure. Thank you. 5 minutes. Thank you so much. Seeing all these young scholars, brilliant scholars, and also my old, colleagues here, it's beautiful being here after more than 10 years, actually more than a decade. It's been a privilege to be part of this network, and I'm sure Nilüfer, after listening to Rania, it was so emotional. Nilüfer will be so proud seeing all of us, all the crew here joining in the hall. Nilüfer just introduced me to my colleagues here, and Ajit was also my supervisor. To those of you who have not, I just met with, and thanks to her, I met Rania, and we started with working on time poverty. Suddenly, after long conversations at night, she came to me. I was visiting, coming every summer, and she came to me that Emel, we need to work on time poverty, and it handed me like Kopaday. You remember Harvey and Mukapaday paper and the World Bank time poverty paper. This is wrong. This should be how we measure time poverty. We need to, work on this, and it was amazing. That's how it started. We presented, in house, and thanks to Dimitri, he believed in us, and many thanks to colleagues here, and also special thanks for the student scholarship. You just started. Let me just go to the paper now. Asiya, thank you so much for your present, and on your behalf, all the colleagues that joined. And it's a very good idea to bring a big team with public officials, because it's a part of our job, in a sense, in policy making, to do capacity building. It's not a good word to say, but to work together with public officials. I received your paper very recently. I'm sorry for, I don't share presentation slides, but I can send you my notes. It was great to read about, Tanzania and learn about it, more about the informal, nature of the labor markets. But I also had, several questions. If I can have a, full, complete report, probably I'll clarify my points better. But just a few comments about the model that it is in the draft paper related to your results. I most welcome the endogenous labor supply equation that you link with unpaid work and paid work, and taking it like a binding, in a sense, labor force participation of women and labor. But one thing I told, especially in the road infrastructure simulation, you focused, focus more on commuting time rather than probably other parts of unpaid work time, right? It would be a good idea to look at how much the share of commuting time, whether it is enough time binding or not, in terms of labor force participation. And there's a very good resource, probably you're aware, Ajit and the colleagues here have been working on Tanzania for years, working on the, probably they will tell more about that as they are and input-output models and road infrastructure investment, etc. And the results are kind of, can be compared, to make it more, in a sense, developed, your paper. The other thing is, and when I look at your results, it was interesting to see household type, I guess, in one of your tables, who have children younger than 5 years old. They get the most benefits from the road infrastructure. So it was interesting, they suddenly go to the formal market, and all the discussions that we had yesterday in line with that, construction sector has been, more than 50%, more than half of it usually employ informal employment, but children, young women with children younger than 5 years old, because of the road infrastructure, because of that investment, suddenly could get rid of their time binding constraints, commitments, etc., responsibilities, and decide enter to the formal market. So those things should be I think retold along the lines with Ajit, Tom, and colleagues study here. It would be a good idea to link it with the, and I saw IPEC's study in your citations. It would be good to link with employment programs. You know, it would be good to link with the employment guarantee programs, in a sense, investment in early childhood education, etc., to end up with formal employment for especially women, young women with young children. What else? And the other one, just another point. After, yeah, I'm cutting. Infrastructure investment, you end up with the highest impact on transportation, electricity and gas, and business services. It was like kind of, you know, male-dominated sectors, first of all. And the other thing is, I mean, coming from Turkey after just the earthquake, all the devastation happened. After the damages, it's like the construction sector just skyrocketed in that area, and it created a regional labor market there. And for informal employment, the wages just tripled suddenly, but not for the local people though. You know, informal employment were coming from outside the region. And usually men, of course, mostly in construction sector. So it's like, you know, it was like, I mean, it's a huge devastating happened in Turkey, but it was like a laboratory in a sense, seeing how employment markets, informal labor markets work in situations like construction investment is huge, as is yours. Last point, the other wage subsidy scenario that you mentioned, I think, you know, giving just subsidy to one of the demographic group in the labor market could be against some of the, you know, international conventions, etc., etc. But what you can link it is wage subsidies could be again linked to the employment guarantee programs, like, you know, wages or tax credits or something, you know, different kind of setup could be thought about that to hire women in formal labor market, just like either taking care of children or taking care of elderly, etc. That wage subsidy simulation scenario could be also retold along the lines with them. I think that would be a good idea to go over or to, you know, study together, to work together with the group here. Thank you.
So next we'll have Luiza and Pires from Unicamp, talking about tax reforms for the provision of care and public investment for tax incentives.
Hello.
Hello.
Here. Can do this. I thought for a little while in this room, and I always felt very weird about my size and like the size of this and like behind people. So I'm always very aware of being visible.
Well, Ikhide was saying yesterday that the podium here has a gender bias.
It definitely does. Like that. Wow.
Gender height bias.
Yes. Well, even without the gender bias, that would have been, yeah. I don't think it's only a matter of gender when it comes to me, but anyways. Okay, so thank you so much. It's very great to be back at the Levy. There is some, as I guess Levy people will see, there is some influence on the Levy work on this. The ideal way of doing what I am trying to do in this paper would have been on a combined model where all pieces that I'm bringing together is actually just one model with a SAM. And this is a little bit ad hoc in some parts, and I will talk a little bit about that and what would be the ultimate idea. And basically, I think that's something that the Levy people could help me do. So I'll start giving you some context on Brazil, then talk about the motivation of this paper, because basically the main result that I get is pretty obvious. I don't need to do the simulations I'm doing to know what I find out. So it's more something about what is the cost to inequality to a certain type of preference that we've been doing in Brazil, which is more of a political preference than actually a policy-oriented type of decision. I'll talk a little bit about the methodology. I have details on an appendix, and that's all described in the paper, and then show the results. So giving some context, I think the first one is Brazil is a highly unequal country, but a highly unequal country that does not have as much poverty as other countries with the same level of inequality. Part of that has to do with our 1988 constitution, which have guaranteed the right to public education and public health. So that has maintained a certain level of well-being to a very important group of people. And that has been done through a public system. So it's not like in the US, for example, where you have types of credits that goes to people that then can get the basic goods on the market. You actually have a public system of education and a public system of health. The health fund is one of our prides, I would say. The public education system is not as great as one would like, but there has been attack to those, and I am going to talk about that as well when I give some of my motivation. It is a very tax regressive country, and that comes from the same reason of other countries in Latin America, which is that our revenue comes mostly from indirect taxes, but there is also a tax regressivity in Brazil when you just take into account our direct tax system. So when you're looking into the direct tax system, there is a regressivity at the top. And that's mainly because since 1996, we do not tax capital gains or profits anymore on the person. We only tax those in the firm. And this has created a type of distortion. So when you go to the very top 1%, they are paying less taxes than the percentile right before them. And the top bracket in Brazil is 27.5. And we only have 14% of our population paying direct taxes. So because of this high inequality, and it's a high inequality that is mostly accentuated at the very top. So if you look at Brazil, how unequal it is, it would be not as unequal if you look at the Gini as if you look, for example, at the Palmer ratio or the percentage of the income that goes to the very top. And this has also to do with certain privileges. One of the papers we worked on, we show that when you go to the top 1%, actually it's only regressive for white people. It's not regressive for Black people because of the type of income that they receive. So there are all these kind of distortions in the system that we've been working on. And another reason why we would have this regressivity is the tax deductions. So you have certain types of tax deductions. For example, in Brazil, even though we have a health system that is unified, and that is one of our prides, we have tax deductions for health expenses. So all of your health expenses can be deducted from your taxes. And this is a little weird for us, because if you have that system, why are also giving people incentive to use the private system? And finally, since I would say 2016, we've had like a very sharp shock of austerity in Brazil, even before actually. So 2014, when Dilma starts her second term, she puts on the Ministry of Finance someone that is doing a shock on austerity, and she ends up getting impeached through a kind of fiscal witch hunt. I'm not going to go in details on that, but since then, austerity has been part of any story that we have to tell when we're talking about any macroeconomic problem. So getting a little bit more into this fiscal context, what happened is, so in 2016, we got a new fiscal rule. This fiscal rule froze all of our expenses for 20 years. So when Lula was reelected recently, the very first thing he had to do was negotiate with a very conservative Congress to change that fiscal rule. The change in that fiscal rule was not that great. So now we have what we call a flexible kind of ceiling. So we still have a top on how much we can spend. And these are simulations we did. So on the left here is how much is going to be the primary government expenditures as a proportion of the GDP, depending on a few scenarios, depending on how much GDP grows and how much revenue grows. So what we see is basically in terms of GDP, this is going to be falling. The second problem we have is that because our health system, part of the Constitution is that there is a minimum that needs to be spent on health and education. So if you take alone what is the minimum, the constitutional minimum on health, that's going to be growing as a percentage of GDP over time, which means that our expenses for everything else is getting squeezed over time with the new rule. As a consequence of that, they're now talking about revising the constitutional floor for health. There is push to, for example, get that out of the rule. So we could have that health and education, for example, are not part of the fiscal rule, but this is not being, we're not able to negotiate that. Basically, they are renegotiating the Constitution. And over, that's what we've been saying. Those fiscal rules are ways of forcing us to renegotiate the Constitution and the basic rights that we've had. So even though we have this scenario, there is some kind of special treatments that we observe, and one of them has to do with tax expenditures. So for some reason, when we have the whole austerity discussion, tax expenditures, they're not seen as expenditures somehow. They're of a different nature because they don't even become something that is going to be accounted on that expenditure. This is just revenue that the government is giving up on. So what has happened over the years is that we've seen an increase in tax expenditures, and no one is worried about those just having an impact on our deficit or on our public budget. So this also has to do a little bit with our political context. And here I'm just going to be citing two things that has to do with tax reforms. The first one is the work of Martha Hedge, who is a political scientist. And what she finds is that between 1989 and 2020, 67% of the tax reforms presented in Congress created a tax deduction. So most of the reforms we get are usually favoring tax deductions and not increasing revenue. The other one is from a narrative database that we did at our research center. And we find that between 1947 and 2017, of the reforms that actually had a justification for it, only 11% intended on increasing government revenues, and 15% were justified in terms of tax justice. All of the others had to do with modernization, economic growth, inflation correction, which many of them are going to actually be regressive types of tax reforms. So in terms of care, what we have in Brazil right now is we have this system, as I mentioned, the unified health system. We also have a unified social assistance system, but we do not have a care system. What we have is on this government was created a secretariat that is going to be taking care of the care policy. They have sent to the Congress the care policy plan, the care policy, and now they're developing a plan based on that policy, has not been approved yet. But basically, they have no budget. What they have is the ability of overseeing what already exists. So the idea is that we do have already many care public services, but they are not overseen as care. They are seen as either health or education or something else, or transfer programs like the Bolsa Familia. And the idea is that there will be like a central mind around it, but they have very little room to change things. So with that in mind, we've been thinking, what are the kind of policies that might end up going to Congress as part of this? And given this parliamentary preference for deductions versus increases in revenue, which is really what we need this year. So there is a tax reform that is going to be passing through the Congress soon, that the idea is to increase the revenue exactly to deal with the new fiscal rule. So the negotiation that happened on Congress was that we will pass a fiscal rule, but we will need to increase revenue. We don't know if that's actually going to happen, given that it's extremely hard to increase revenue for tax reforms, especially with the Congress that we have. So basically what we did is to try to simulate two different types of policies of the same size. One would be if we give a certain amount of money as tax deduction, so same size of cost. So through tax deduction versus through an increase in the education and health system, which is where care is today. So we'll do that first by looking into the expenditure survey. So this is kind of the micro simulation part of it. and looking to who would benefit from that. And as I said, we already know it's going to be very unequal because only 14% of the population pays taxes. So a tax deduction necessarily is going to just be for them. We're not thinking of a kind of transfer tax credit, like in the way it works in the US, for example, where you could still receive that credit even if you don't pay taxes. We're thinking of something really as a deduction on taxes, exactly the way it works for health in Brazil, which is something that already exists there. And we do that by looking into, we created in-kind benefits. So through the tax, through our expenditure survey, we look into the people that uses the public system versus the private system. So we distribute that amount to the people using the public system, and we compare that to just a tax credit for the people that do pay taxes. And then after that, we take those two, basically what we decided to, we first tried to find out how much would be the tax credit on the expenditure survey. We did a comparison on doing that for health, which already exists. And what we find is we are underestimating more or less the amount that this is when we just look into the expenditure survey, when we compare to the total amount of health expenditure that we observe. So what we did is that we did calculate how much would be a tax credit for care in the survey, and then we create a range which is around that number of 6 million to 8 million, 6 million to 10 million reais. So we find that number of how much we're calculating, looking to also the health expenditure. And then we use those two amounts and simulate that in an input-output model. And in the input-output model, what we're doing is that we're looking into the impact on jobs by gender, and I think we do by gender and race, but I'm not 100% sure if that's what I have here right now, I'm sorry. And then we simulate that first through the health and education sector, and then as a disposable income to the families. And this is an input-output model with, for those that know, direct, indirect, and induced effects. So basically, it's going to be most of the induced effects that are going to work in the case of just giving disposable money to the family. So these are the impacts on the Gini, on the Palma ratio. They're very small because this is not a huge impact in terms of the amount, in terms of percentage of GDP. But there is a slightly sensible one. So when we compare the tax deduction to the public care services type of impact. So when you look into the share in income from benefits according to race, what we would see is that, so in green is the public care services impact. So this is the simulations coming from the expenditure survey versus the tax deduction in care. So basically, if we choose the type of policy that increases the public services, we would have an overwhelming impact on Black people. If it is through the tax deduction, it would be overwhelming white, the people that are benefiting from this. When we look into the income by gender, this is not going to be as different. We have a difficulty because the data here is on the family level. So we need to decide to do this through the head of the family. So there's some difficulties with that. I'm going to have to jump very quickly. And this is the benefit through the decile. So this is exactly as expected. It's only the top percentiles that are receiving any kind of benefit when we look into the deciles, talking about tax deduction. And it's very spread out, the distribution, when we're looking into public services. Finally, the job simulation. So the job simulation we do in public health and public education, because those are separate columns on our input-output table. So there is no synthetic sector here. Those are the observed sectors in our economy. And we have a very similar distribution of jobs in the public education and public health system in terms of gender. This is because in Brazil, the public system, so the private system of health and education are very unequal in terms of jobs for men and women, but the public is actually very balanced. And if you do the tax deduction on care, this is gonna more or less kind of replicate the overall structure of our system, because this is just through some kind of indirect effect. So this is more spread in our economy. So the types of sectors that are receiving more jobs. They're kind of more whatever is that people are spending money on. And one thing is actually that this is a little overestimated, because what we are saying is that this would be given to the whole families. And actually what we have is that this is a type of credit that is being given to the top of the distribution that usually spends less than the bottom. But this is something very difficult to do on an input-output table. That's why we need a SAM, a social accounting matrix.
So are the figures okay? 58, 42?
Yeah, that was a word.
Size
Why not?
size of the-
So yeah, the size, so this is both, so this is both the size of it and then the distribution of it. So here there are less jobs that are created. So it's less jobs and it's worse distributed. Those are more jobs, better distributed among people. And same thing here. So here is black women, black men, and white men. Those are not gonna complete the sum because we have other races, but they're not easy to simulate because of the size of the samples. And on the right side, so basically what we have is that the bigger the bigger the shop, the more jobs is gonna be created, but it's not gonna be distributed differently. So this is why we just have the two. Okay, that's it. I need to finish. So
5 minutes.
concluding remarks, the parliament preference towards tax expenditures have significant costs in terms of inequality in the people that benefit from the policy and the number of jobs created and the distribution of it. That's it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Luiza. So for discussion of Luiza's paper, we'll have Mina Baliamoune-Lutz. Not too bad.
Yeah, I did think about the podium. I was gonna say that as part of my presentation. I think it's totally gender biased because on average in the whole world, women are shorter than men. Look at us. Okay, so this is really wonderful paper, and this is the type of paper that got me sitting and saying, I wish I could have the same type access to data like that for African countries and MENA countries. Unfortunately, we don't have. So I really don't have a lot to say, except I'm gonna start by just summarizing the points a little bit. We know about the high inequality in Brazil, a country that I know a lot, actually. I don't know about the lot in terms of fiscal things, but I know the country because I used to do study abroad there with my students every year. So it has beautiful. So there is in addition to the high inequality, there is the narrow fiscal space. And in addition to that, you have this limited new rule that until now it's still kind of in place that makes it easier to implement a tax incentive as opposed to public spending. And also there's this existing evidence that when you present tax reforms to Congress, somebody did a study and they found that ultimately they will generate negative effect on the government's budget. Okay. The two main goals in the paper, if I may summarize that, is just to compare the impact on inequality of a personal income tax deduction for care-related services versus compare that to government expenditure on public service of the same amount. And then the second goal is to estimate the impacts of the two policies on jobs, job creation, based on or separating them by gender and race. Okay, the results, of course, as you already heard, the first main result is that the tax incentive benefits the top two deciles, which will contribute to even further inequality in Brazil, and the public expenditure will benefit the bottom three deciles, which would be a nice thing to see. Second result is that there's an impact on inequality itself by gender or race, and it is better, that impact is better under the public policy scheme, public spending policy scheme. The third one is compared to investing in physical, and I don't think that came across, but I read this in the physical infrastructure, investing in social infrastructure increases female, and especially Black females' employment. That's, in my view, is an important thing, and you didn't have lots of time, but it would have been really nice to the audience if you didn't read the paper to go and read that, because that part is very interesting. Now, I only have suggestions. The first one is that spending on education, as we know, and I don't know if they changed the starting age or if it is still the same thing. It is compulsory and free for ages 7 through 17 in Brazil. So that's already included in public spending. So when you do the spending, the additional amounts in education and health, especially part on education, how do you account for that? Because that's already included. And yes, the ones who benefit the most from that are the lower income category, people with lots of money send their kids to private schools. That's happening in all developing countries now. Okay, so that's one thing that's important. This at least clarify that point. The second thing is we need more details on physical and social infrastructure. I know for the social, you are saying spending on health and education, but the physical infrastructure was included there, because then that would be important, especially if I were to take your model or your analysis and try to apply it to other countries, then at least I will know what type of physical things I should be looking at. The third point is, given the current fiscal space in context in Brazil, and you said that it is really difficult, it might not even change things, it would be nice to add in the paper a few points about how to go about it, convincing or persuading the policymakers. And I think if it is not done while Lula is president, when is it going to be done, right? So that's it. That's all I have to say. Wait.
Next, we have Emily Ikhide from the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, I believe in Nigeria, on economic, gender, and food security implications to help focus fiscal policy. Emily.
Hi everyone, good morning. To see this, can I put this here?
Yeah.
At the top.
Yes.
So it's nice to be here again. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Emily Ikhide, and I'm from Nigeria. This is a paper Shola and I, we currently had to, even though it's still a paper in progress, we're not through with some of the things we want to actually do. But it came about when last year we had a change of government, and then when the president came and on the day of his inauguration, he just made some policy statements that turned the country upside down. Like on the day of inauguration, he decided that he was going to remove the fuel subsidy without consulting anybody. He did that, and of course, you know what the reaction we got. And then so since June last year, he's made some big policy statements that it's Nigeria, it's a big country, and whatever statement or whatever you do, the ripple effect on the population is quite much. And this was one of the policies that also came out last year. And so as the head of the Gender and Inclusivity Unit in my office, National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies is the research arm of the Nigerian National Parliament. So I was called by a member of the House and to do a policy brief on this. And so we did a policy brief, and we thought, okay, it would be nice to have an empirical paper on it as well to kind of inform the government, and that's why we're here. So quickly, I'll run through the background. So in the past of recent, we've had, I think this is common to almost every country. We have the US has also implemented in state, and Mexico, a lot of countries having the same issue. We've had cases of non-communicable disease on the rise. And according to WHO, we're told that the age standardized mortality rate in Nigeria is now about 565 out of 100,000 male and 546 out of 100,000 female. That was last year, a report. And what that translates to in terms of income is at about 122,000 naira, which is equivalent of $39.8. That's 24% of household food expenditure is spent annually on NCD care in Nigeria. So, of course, it's a big concern for the government because I think of recent, you just see people slum, maybe because of other challenges, but it has become very pronounced. I think in the last 6 months, we've had at the national parliament, maybe 2 members that slumped. So it's just like it has become a very common occurrence. And one of the evidences that has also come out is that this is traced to sweetened sugar beverages. That's the evidence that has come. And of course, when the government hears of this in a way to just take action, they implemented the tax on SSBs. So to address some of those challenges, I think in the past 6 or almost a year, the government, along with the Ministry of Health, has implemented several policies which had not really worked. They've placed a ban. It didn't work. Because in Nigeria, we have a very large informal sector, which is almost bigger than the formal sector. So the government can only have control on the formal sector. The informal sector is larger than the formal, so it didn't work. We've had health warnings in terms of, okay, do not advertise tobacco, do not advertise some of the sweetened things, but really hasn't worked much. Media campaigns stopped, hasn't worked. So in 2023, the new government implemented the sugar taxes measure to try and control the consumption of sugary beverages in Nigeria. So the policy measure imposed 10% excise tax on sugary beverages. And even though, of course, it was because of the concern for public health, and people talked a lot about it, that it was a good measure. There were concerns by the economists and also, of course, the production industry of the true effect of this policy that has been implemented. And while the policy aimed at yielding health outcomes, we found that potential social and economic implications were not really thought of. They were not considered. It was just a policy that the government made. And also in literature, we couldn't see much about it that was done. It was done based on health concerns, not really with no much consideration on the potential social economic implications. And that's why we decided to do an empirical study on it. So the objective is very clear, to examine the impact of the sugar tax on the Nigerian economy with specific references to its gender and poverty effects. So a brief on the literature, I might as well just pass because of time. We've looked at the literature in terms of the overconsumption of the sugar beverages, health effect, and then there were also some literatures that came out that it's actually like a form of revenue generation for the government. So that might be one of the major reasons behind it, because sometimes when the government takes some of these policies or implement, they're not actually looking at the social effect. They are concerned about what's going to come out. So that people have argued that could be one of the major reasons that the government implemented that. So we've also found few on gender effect, especially in Australia. I found a paper by Rose, and also, but we've found limited evidence on the economic-wide effect of the policy. So in terms of methodology, I'm not going to dwell too much on this because my colleague is the expert on this. So we used a CG model which looks at the economic-wide and distributional effect of public policies. That was done by Unicamp et al. In 2010. And specifically, we used the PEP 101 statistic CG modeling by Decalway. I'll just run through, and also, of course, we use that to look at the overall economic impact of some of these macro variables. And then using the micro simulation model, we wanted to know what is the poverty impact of this. And the reason why we actually were interested in that is some of the policies that the government has rolled out in the past few months since it came into power has made some of these variables skyrocket, and poverty is one of them. There's so much hardship in the economy. Removing the fuel subsidy, it's devastating on the economy. So it's so pronounced. So we wanted to know what would be the impact of this on poverty. Of course, we can already see that unemployment is on the high. So to do that, we also use the micro simulation model to find out the impact on poverty. Of course, we used the main database for the main database that we used is the social accounting metrics SAM for Nigeria. That's 2018, the one that was developed by IFPRI. It's not 208, that was a mistake on my part. So what we did was we looked at, in the Nigerian SAM, it contains 3 production factors. We have land, capital, and labor. So what we basically did, because we wanted to focus on household labor, we have 3 labor categories: skilled, unskilled, and semi-skilled. And this aggregated into 1 labor category because we just wanted to find out. And then in terms of the household, we have in the SAM, we have quantiles and of rural and then urban. This we also aggregated into household headed male and then headed by female. We just wanted to look at the basic gender effect as well. And then of course the poverty effect. And then using the living standard measurement survey, the one that's done by the National Bureau of Statistics and World Bank, we were able to look at the poverty analysis. And then some of the elasticity, in case I know we have CG experts here that might want to know. The elasticities we just got from the literature from different countries, wasn't specifically for Nigeria. So basically I run through the results. So what is the impact on consumer prices? So what we found basically is that the sugar tax leads to increase in the prices of all commodities. And then specifically, you say that the beverages and tobacco products, the prices increased most by about 7.1%. And then overall price index, we saw that it increases by 5.2. So that suggests that this policy could be inflationary. I don't know. All right. Yeah, just quickly run through before they show me my time. And then what is the impact on household consumptions? We saw that it will lead to increase in the prices of commodities. Okay, I'm sure I'm going to meet up. The prices of commodities induced by the sugar, so it leads to that. Then that's about 6.9 on male-headed households. So we had more, the impact was high in terms of the male-headed household. I also know that some experts here will argue the fact that we grouped male-headed and female-headed. I know people don't usually accept that, but given the data that we had at the moment, we just had to work with that. And then 2.7% on female-headed household. So that's in terms of household consumption, the consumption of men, the impact on the consumption for male-headed household was higher than that of women. That confirms that the tax induces the desired consumption changes. I can say that, I don't know if men can, but I think it's desired. That's a good result, at least from that angle. And then we also saw that more effect on male-headed household because of the high proportion of income expended on these commodities by men. I think that's straightforward. And then, of course, we also saw the substitution effect. Other commodities are consumed in place of beverages and tobacco. Quickly, then the reduction, we also, in terms of the sectoral output, we saw that the reduction in consumption of sugary beverages products leads to a reduction in the output of the sector, as expected. Output of the beverages and tobacco sector reduced by 3.2. The output of the agricultural sector also reduced by 2. I think they were talking about intermediate linkages between the sector. Then this suggests that the effect of the tax policy may not be limited to only beverages and tobacco sectors. It can spread to other sectors via intermediate consumption. Quickly, and then we looked at the sectoral labor demand. We found that the labor demand effect also mimic the sectoral effect. Labor demand in the beverages and tobacco sector reduced by 3.2%. And then we also saw that labor demand, despite the reduction in the output of agriculture sector, labor demand still increased by 0.2%. This could be a result of the factors of substitution in the sector. The excess labor from the beverages and tobacco sectors make the price of labor wages, which is reduced, which is favorable for the substitution of labor for capital in the agricultural sector. Then in terms of the poverty, when we ran the micro simulation, we saw that there was a decline in the household income and household consumption. Now, okay, what does that actually, 2 minutes, okay. That means that the effect on poverty, it's higher among male-headed households. And that's explainable. I think we can understand, it's understandable than the female-headed household where we saw 1.9%. Then the poverty effect seems to be correlated with the proportion of income spent on beverages and tobacco products. So we saw the share of income spent on the products, the higher is likely to be on the poverty effect. So I'm trying to, so we also look at the implication on food security. We saw that prices, of course, went up. Consumption of beverages and of course also reduced. And then we saw that the overall supply of beverages increased. What happens here is domestic production actually reduced, but imports increased. And what does that imply? It means that we experience higher prices, lower consumption, higher dependence on imports, which indicates some signs of potential food security. So in conclusion, the sugar tax policy can reduce the consumption of sugary beverages in terms of the public health, which is important, but the effect is not only limited to the sector. So if the government is making such policy, there's need to look at the overall impact of such policies. And then we also would like to say that the policy can have adverse effect on economic impact, lower output, lower employment, high prices, high food insecurity, and high poverty levels. These are all the things that we're experiencing in Nigeria now. And so if a government is implementing, because the issue is actually, right now, the government is holding this policy, they are deliberating on it, whether to continue or to, so it's nice for them to have this information. So, and lastly, let me just say this, beyond the health objectives, the wider economic and welfare impact should be taken into consideration in policy formulation. I think those are the messages we want to send to the parliament or the decision makers. We hope that they listen, take decisions quickly. Thank you very much for listening.
So for discussion of the paper, we have Asiya and Maskaeva remotely.
Okay, sorry. Thank you very much. Emily, thank you very much for your very good presentation. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. I know Emily for the long time, and so that we met not long time ago several times during this year, so that Emel works as a good CG. She's a good CG modela. And the topic, Emily, I would like to say for you that it is really hot. It is really important, not only for the Africa, but also for the whole world. But in my experience, what I found here I've been living here 12 years, I found that the Africans, we love sugar too much. And so that introducing the tax for the sugar, of course, that it has introduced these taxes, indirect taxes, especially on the sugar, has a direct effect on the health status of the African population. Topic is very as I said, that topic is nice, and of course that the work is still under the progress. As you mentioned, that researchers are not happy when we split the household between head of the households, so that even me, I'm not so happy. Maybe you will find another way. Maybe you can disaggregate the household by the women and men, with children, without children. It is possible to find a way, but it is not important. The one of the important question, I think that it can make your paper more brilliant, so that if you will be able to link the poverty, as you already estimated, with the household caloric availability and your CGE model, so that it's need to integrate also some additional variable. This is a household caloric availability, and then to see the impact and the linkages with the micro, with the poverty and the macroeconomic results, the spread. Maybe it will be interesting. And another one, when I read your paper, I found that why she decided to disaggregate the household by the head, why she did not touch the labor. I say, okay, but then what I found that today during your presentation, so that you focus on the labor market, so that if you introduce the results and you focus on the labor market, maybe it is better for the next stage also to check to find the opportunity to split the labor between male and female, and then to see the impact, because maybe it will be interesting. As well, that very good presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Asiya.
Thank you.
So if the presenters could all join me up front, Asiya, you can stay where you are. And we'll allow everybody to first we'll allow folks to respond to their well, we'll take some more questions and then we can have the responses to the discussants and questions. So questions. I'm sorry, I don't read. Then Ajit, then Julia, and Mark.
Hi, I have a question for Emily. This is a query to start with. How do you exactly measure the labor demand? Like, what is the variable that you have used? Can you explain? This is actually relevant for my own work as well, like empirically distinguishing the labor supply and labor demand. I was curious. And few more comments. This is really interesting work. Thank you for doing this. I was wondering, when you mentioned about the female-headed household and male-headed household, I came across few papers that has debate about how do surveys define whether it is a male-headed or female-headed. Do you have any idea how the survey that you have utilized categorize the households between male-headed and female-headed? Is it because of the age of someone who is making the decisions, or whoever is earning more takes the decision? Is it categorized on the basis of that? And as you have mentioned, as you have shown that there has been some sectoral transition from people working in those manufacturing sectors and transitioning to the agricultural sectors. Maybe you can zoom into the sectoral decompositions, like what is exactly happening in the agricultural sector? Like, has there been an influx of the labor supply, or there has been some increase in the labor demand for some other like scenario or circumstances? Yeah, thank you.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentations. I have a couple of comments. First about Asiya's paper, which is looking at a question that we tried to look at some time ago here at the Levy Institute, which was to look at the investment in physical infrastructure, right, specifically roads, and assets, its impacts, macroeconomic as well as distribution impacts. Now, in your model, it seems like investment in physical infrastructure is simply assumed by specifying elasticity to increase factor productivity. You mentioned like a particular study or a couple of studies from which you draw this elasticity parameter. So I guess if that's the case, then what's happening in terms of labor market as specified in the model is, I think, quite transparent to see, because this is really an exogenous shift then in the labor supply function. And the new equilibrium is found at a higher level of employment. And then, you know, depending on the input-output structure of the economy, fading into the labor markets. Now, of course, those who benefit from the road construction would like to see this as it's good for everybody, and including gender equality. And who are these people who are benefiting from it? If you actually look at the road coverage in Tanzania, it's only 3% of the roads that are paved today. So nobody will argue against it. The question is that the coverage right now, the way the road network is being built out in Tanzania right now, is heavily geared towards resource extraction from Tanzania, rather than lowering the commuting times of working population, whether they're in the rural areas or in the urban areas. In the urban areas, you can see this clearly by looking at the gap between the expenditures on roads and the expenditures on public transportation. How are people supposed to get around just because we have roads? Now, for Luiza's paper, I just like to comment this emphasis on tax expenditures in the global south. I mean, one really has to look at the political economy of the welfare state in these countries. And this is essentially public subsidies for the private sector, and especially for the very rich. A month ago, we were in Ankara talking about the pension system in South Africa and in Ghana. And we were discussing how the tax expenditures, which is aimed at South Africa, for example, which is targeted towards taxpayers, the richer people who are employed in the private sector, formal private sector, the tax expenditures in terms of percentage of GDP in South Africa is equivalent to what's spent there in terms of the old age grant. It's as large as that. So I think we have to, strip the weight of tax expenditures for what they are. They are social welfare, there's a welfare state for the rich. And the results that you're getting, I think, kind of resonates that aspect. Thank you very much.
Julia's next. And if we could keep our questions and comments to under 5 minutes.
Yes, I mean, really quickly for Luiza, just a suggestion. To introduce also a life cycle perspective. So looking also at age in the screening in the dimension that you use, not only gender and race, because actually what has been found at the European level is that the tax incentives tend to increase gender inequalities and gender gaps for elderly people. So I will introduce also the age.
Mark, and then.
Quick question for Luiza. I thought this was a follow-up on Mina's third point, but now I think I realize it's a follow-up on the previous two questions. I was just wondering, despite differences in levels of development and institutions, if there are lessons from the EU that could be, used for political leverage. And I'm thinking here of countries that are at once trying to pursue some kind of public provision of care services whilst struggling under the yoke of fiscal rules. So it has been done, but there are others trying to do the same thing. And is there political leverage there to help you with this?
And finally, one last question, and then we can have responses.
My question is for Emily. It's a very short question. So if sugar consumption is associated with an increase in healthcare costs over time, I'm wondering if your model takes that into account and how you would think about that as against all the other potential inflation impacts and the other economic impacts that you show.
So we have, let's see,
I say
2 minutes left.
I saved 5 minutes for the discussion. I was waiting.
All right, Mina.
I use those, right?
The transfers.
Very quick meeting.
The corporate now is talking about the same issue, the effects of sugar on the population's health. So I suggest you follow on their website, the department's website, to see what's going on there.
So when we take it in the order that we presented, so Asiya, if you want to respond to questions and the discussant first.
Yeah, yes, let me answer briefly. Yes, of course. First of all, I know your paper very well. We know your paper very well, and we use it as an azbuka. Tanzania case, Ghana case, and it was very well written. This is a first, and thank you very much for this publication. And the second one, what I would like to say for you that about the transportation sector, the road development, the investment from the government expenditure. Yes, it is a lot of question, a lot of discussion about this one, but I think that this is a good starting point. Let's try, let's the Africa build before the roads and then to focus on the transportation sector. Without roads, what kind of car we are going to use? I've been living here 12 years. I change a lot of cars, and the problem comes from the road. But now where I'm living, I'm living in the Dodoma. This is the capital city. We have excellent road infrastructure, so that it reduces our time and other benefits we receive from this one. In terms of modeling, I'm sorry that I forgot the question. My computer was in plug off, and that's why I did not write the question, but we will take into account. But in the technical report, we introduced the whole issue related to the modeling. Some elasticities we obtain, yes, from the secondary, from the literature. We didn't estimate ourselves because we didn't have the capacity, and it was our how can I say that it was a challenge for us, and this maybe it was one of the weakness of the project, so that we didn't estimate the elasticities, and to find exactly the elasticities for the time allocation for the households between all our categories households. It was a very big challenge. Yeah, and if I responded well on your questions.
Thank you. Luiza.
Hello, okay, I feel like I have 0 minutes since I already used it, but let's try to do it very quickly. So first, thank you so much, Mina, for the comments. That's very helpful. Regarding the fact that public education is already included. So basically what we're looking into here is like increasing the quality in some ways. So this is gonna mean that whatever is the benefit in kind of this is gonna be higher. And also it's not like we have that available, we have enough spots for everyone and things like that. So we do need to increase the investment on that. So this is the idea behind it, is that we're not at full production possible level of those anyways.
The whole, and I mean, this also has to do with the political economy of this, and that's already going to be answering to your last question as well. So we've been thinking a lot of how would we push for more public education and private and public health investment, and that also has to do with having less incentive for the rich people to use the private system. So this is a very complicated matter there. So if public education and public health were better funded, maybe rich people would also be using this, and there would be a push for it to be more invested on, and there would be a different view of what is the role of the state in terms of welfare state. What we have right now is it's as if this is just a favor that is being done for the poor people, and that's not what it's supposed to be at all. And so this also, how can we go about convincing policymakers? I don't think we can convince policymakers unless we change who the policymakers are. We can try to convince general public and have a push for that in a way. So that's also why I'm writing such an obvious paper for us. So this is like, I'm just making it clear and making it evidence-based, as they really like to see, of what is this cost of what they're doing. We went to present this paper at the Ministry of Social Development to the Secretariat that is developing the care policy. So this is also what we've been doing. We've been trying to bring those results in contact with them of what is it that is going to be helpful to all of you for us to produce in terms of evidence that you can push for something different. The other part is advocacy, which is what we're working on right now, is also making legislation, giving those legislations in the hand of progressive policymakers to try to push to different things. So this is how we've been working more or less. Physical infrastructure, basically it's construction sector. That comes from a different paper we did where we do also a simulation on the construction sector. So we compare the results to that one as well. So we have that from a different simulation we do. That's why it's not as explicit on this paper. I think I need to revise and make it more explicit. But thank you for that comment. I think the political economy of this is, as Ajit, I feel like it was a little bit more of a comment, but one thing I want to mention as well is when we look into the discourse on the Bolsa Família itself, there is also a problem of political economy, which is not only has to do with giving more money to the rich people, but also in general, moving to a kind of basic income kind of model where people can then go and buy their own goods. So for example, back, I don't know, 10 years ago, people are really going after the Bolsa Família program, which is targeted to the poor. Now it's extremely accepted. It increased a lot and everyone, oh, this is great. The way I look at this is not, oh, we finally convinced people that we need to lift people out of poverty. It's a different way of seeing the role of the state itself, because we see that together with an attack on our services. So I feel like this fits into that narrative as well. I'll talk to you about the age outside, because I don't think it can be done, but I need to think in terms of what the data we have and where we're simulating this. I don't know as much about the experiences on the EU, but we can also, that would be interesting as well. One thing is what is investment in the fiscal rule is physical infrastructure. And this is a problem that we also been going after. It's like take into account, for example, multiplier effects in your fiscal rule instead of taking into account just physical infrastructure has a special treatment. Thank you.
Okay, so Emel, you get the last words.
Yes, thank you. Asiya, thank you very much. Like I stated, this came from a policy brief. If we had to disaggregate labor and households, it would be a lot of work. It was just something we had to put together. So yeah, I take your point. We can disaggregate labor and go into male, female. We can do that with time. And also household calories, that's something we can also consider. So I take your comments and thank you very much. We'll try and split male and female and see the impact of the tax on them by gender. We'll see what it might actually yield a different result than what we have right now. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, in terms, like I said, the sum that we're using was developed by HIFPRI, and the definition or the measurement we have for labor, we have skilled labor, we have unskilled labor, and then we have semi-skilled labor. Unskilled are those that did not go to school, that don't have any educational background at all. Semi-skilled is from they have primary to, I think, secondary, and then of course skilled labor, we're considering tertiary and all of that that falls into it. That's a measurement, that's the definition for the SAM. In terms of female-headed, and also they looked, of course, culture comes to play in most of the sense. They look at income, and also in terms of the person that is in charge of the home, because sometimes income doesn't really work as a good definition in Nigeria, because whether a man is rich, working or not in Nigeria, the man is the head of the home. So those things to come to play in terms of looking at it, but it was developed by Ikhide. We just used the SAM as it is. The labor sector transition is something we can look into with time, but we just aggregated just to meet up with and because we're also just focusing, we wanted to know the social. I think somebody asked me about the health implication of the consumption if we actually did that. We didn't focus on that because recently I think the Ministry of Health released a report that yes, sugar actually has an impact on those. It is a direct effect. It has an effect on it. So we didn't actually focus on the health impact of the tax, because that is evidence in what we have seen. There's a lot of literature on that, and we have literature on the fact that it also can generate a lot of revenue for the government. So we actually didn't look at those two areas. We were mainly focused on the social impact, and that we focused a lot on the poverty level. And that's what we presented here. So thank you very much. I think I answered everybody this question. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Asiya and Luiza and the discussants.